Opening a file is easy, but opening it safely is what separates beginner's code from reliable code. In this video, we're going to learn about how do we read and write files in Python without breaking or losing our data. So in the previous video, we looked into the open function and how we needed to provide at least two parameters to it, one being the path and the other is the mode in which we want to read the file. And we've mentioned how we do always need to remember to close the files, otherwise your computer will keep the file locked and keep the resources exhausted even though your program is done executing. We've only used the read mode, but let me just mention the other modes that you could also use, which are the W for write, A for append, and WB or RB for reading and writing in binary mode. Now we were able to read the file and we were able to look into some of the meta information that comes out of it, but we did not actually read the context or the content of the file yet. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll create another variable, I'll call it text, and this is gonna be file.read or f.read. And now if I print out whatever that text is, this is when we get the text outputted to our output here. You could also read the files line by line. So let me go ahead and copy the snippet again. And instead of using the read function, I'm just gonna create a for loop that for each line in my file, I'm gonna go ahead and print out whatever that line is. And if we execute the snippet, here we go, we get the output. Notice how there's an extra empty line that comes between one and the next. That's because one of them is coming from the file itself and the other is caused by the print statement itself. So I'll go ahead and just strip the original text. That way we remove that extra line. And here we go back to the normal output that we saw earlier. This here is more memory efficient, especially if you have large files, so that you don't have to load the entire text or the entire content of your file all at once. So it is generally preferable that you would use, if you're trying to read the file, is that you would use the for loops instead. Now, in both of those scenarios here, I still had to keep that f.close function. So let me switch this over to use the with statement. So if I call with open as file, this here is what we call a context manager, which basically would automatically close the file once it's done reading. So I'll go ahead and do this over here as well. So with the result of opening the file named f, let's go ahead and do all of those. And I'll remove the f right there, or the f.closer over here. So if I run all of these cells, everything continues to operate normally. And what I've done here is that I omitted the scenario in which I might forget to add my close file, because I'm using a context manager that automatically, as soon as we're done using the file, it'll know that it will have to close it after it's done. Now let's try to do the same thing with writing to a file instead. So here I'll do with open, I'll just create a new file. I'll call it output.txt. I'll open it in the write mode and I'll call the connection f, and in here I'll call f.write. This is a test, and if I save this and execute it, here we go, we get this output produced, and if I open it, we get the text that we passed into our function call over here. Now if I try to call the same function again using, this is test2, and run it and go back to check our output here, you see how it overrode the previous output instead of adding to it. This is where we switch this to the append mode. And now if I do, this is a test3, and save and execute and go back to my output.txt, we get both of those still in the file. Now maybe what I need to do over here is make sure that I add an empty line at the end using the \n. And now if I run this, this is in write mode, so it's gonna overwrite anything in the file. And then this here is in append mode, so technically it should just add to the existing. So let's go back to our output, and here we go, we get these two outputted. Now let's try the same thing just so we can see what would the output look like. If I try to do two writes while in write mode, One is just called test1, and this is test2. And we'll do the same thing again with 3 and 4. Okay, so let me run this here and look at the output. We get both of those output correctly. And now if I go back here and call this function, we get 3 and 4 added as well. So when you are in the same context, you're able to write multiple times and it will know not to override one with the other. However, in the second time we called the function, we have to make sure that we're calling it with the append mode. That way we're not overriding the file, but rather appending or adding to it. So now that we know how to open, read, and write files, in the next video, we're going to talk about how we can rename files and move them around and even delete them using some of the Python built-in functions, particularly the operating system library or the operating system module or the OS module.